Imagine discovering the secrets of liberation, not through renunciation or penance, but through a shift in perception, realizing that you are not bound by the body or mind. The Ashtavakra Gita delivers this profound wisdom through a powerful dialogue between a king seeking freedom and a sage who reveals the truth of existence. These ancient conversations hold the key to unlocking the door to eternal peace and self realization. Dive into this timeless teaching that promises to free your soul from worldly attachments and open your eyes to the infinite consciousness that resides within. The Ashtavakra Gita is an ancient Indian scripture revered for its profound philosophical insights into the nature of the self reality and the path to liberation. Written as a dialogue between the sage Ashtavakra and King Janak, the text presents the core tenets of Advaita Vedanta, emphasizing non duality and the realization that the self is identical to the absolute reality. King Janak, a wise and just ruler, seeks ultimate knowledge and liberation from the cycle of birth and death. Ashtavakra, a sage born with physical deformities yet possessing great spiritual wisdom, guides him through a series of dialogues that unravel the mysteries of the self and the universe. This Gita does not rely on rituals or external practices for liberation, but rather points to a direct experiential understanding of one's true nature as pure, undivided consciousness. Chapter 1: The Seeker and the Sage. The first chapter opens with King Janak's earnest inquiry into the nature of liberation. His position as a ruler and his worldly responsibilities have not diminished his thirst for spiritual truth. In the royal court, he approaches sage Ashtavakra with a burning question. Janak: O sage, how can one attain knowledge, liberation, and detachment? What is the nature of the self, and how can I be free from this world of suffering? This initial inquiry sets the tone for the profound discourse that follows. Ashtavakra, sensing the purity of Janak's intent, responds with clarity. Ashtavakra: O king, if you seek liberation, renounce the identification with the body and mind. Abandon all desires for worldly pleasures and realize that you are pure, unattached consciousness. Liberation is not something you attain, it is your very nature. All that is needed is to remove the veil of ignorance. This opening exchange is critical because it establishes the core theme of the Ashtavakra Gita. The idea that liberation is not an achievement or a goal that one strives toward, rather, it is the realization of what has always been true. The self is free, eternal, and beyond all worldly experience. Chapter 2: The Nature of the Self. Ashtavakra continues his discourse by explaining the true nature of the self, which is beyond the body, mind, and intellect. He emphasizes that all suffering arises from the mistaken belief that we are the body and mind, subject to birth, death, pain, and pleasure. Ashtavakra: O Janak, the body is born and the body will die, but you are not the body. The mind is full of thoughts and desires, but you are not the mind. You are the pure witness, the silent observer of all experiences. Know yourself as the self, free from the limitations of the body and mind, and you will be liberated. This teaching challenges the conventional understanding of identity. Most people believe that they are their body, their thoughts, or their emotions. Ashtavakra invites Janak to go beyond this identification and recognize the true self as the witness of all phenomena. Chapter 3: Detachment and Dispassion. In the third chapter, Ashtavakra addresses the concept of detachment, which is a key step toward liberation. He explains that attachment to the world and its fleeting pleasures is the root cause of suffering. True freedom comes from recognizing the impermanent nature of the world and remaining unattached to it. Janak: O sage, how can one remain dispassionate in a world full of desires and distractions? Ashtavakra: Attachment binds you to the wheel of birth and death. The wise one knows that the world is an illusion, like a mirage in the desert. Just as one does not chase after the water in a mirage, the wise one does not chase after the pleasures of the world. Remain unattached, and you will be free from suffering. Ashtavakra uses powerful metaphors to illustrate the illusory nature of the world. The comparison to a mirage highlights the futility of seeking happiness in external things, which are ultimately unreal. By cultivating detachment, one can transcend the cycle of desire and suffering. Chapter 4: The Illusion of the World. As the dialogue deepens, Ashtavakra reveals the illusory nature of the world and all its experiences. He explains that the world we perceive is a projection of the mind, not an objective reality. Just as a dream seems real while we are dreaming, the world seems real because of our identification with the body and mind. Ashtavakra, O Janak, the world you perceive with your senses is not real. It is like a dream, a projection of your mind. Just as a dream vanishes upon waking, the world will vanish when you awaken the true truth of the self. Know that the self is eternal, unchanging, and beyond all experiences. This teaching is a direct challenge to our ordinary perception of reality. Ashtavakra invites us to question the very foundation of our experience, suggesting that what we take to be real is in fact a mental projection. Liberation comes when we wake up from this dream and realize the self as the only reality. Chapter 5. The realization of the self. As King Janak absorbs these teachings, he begins to understand the true nature of the self. In the fifth chapter, Ashtavakra describes the state of realization, where one recognizes the self as pure consciousness, free from all limitations. Ashtavakra. When you know that you are the self, unmoving, eternal, and beyond all thought, the world will no longer bind you. You will be like the vast ocean, unaffected by the waves on its surface. The mind may continue to produce thoughts, but the self remains untouched, like the sky unaffected by clouds. This metaphor of the ocean and waves captures the essence of self realization. The waves represent the changing thoughts, emotions, and experiences of life, while the ocean symbolizes the vast, unchanging self. Realization involves recognizing that the self is not affected by the movements of the mind or the world. Chapter 6. Dissolving the ego. As the dialogue progresses, Ashtavakra directs his focus toward the dissolution of the ego, which he identifies as the core obstacle to liberation. The ego is the false sense of self, the identification with the body, mind, and personal identity. Ashtavakra explains that once the ego is dissolved, one can experience true freedom. Janak, O sage, how can one dissolve the ego? It feels as though it controls everything I do and think. Ashtavakra. The ego is nothing more than an illusion, a construct of the mind. It is the I thought that arises when you identify with the body and the mind. But just as a mirage disappears when you approach it, the ego will vanish when you see through its illusion. Realize that you are not the doer, nor are you the experiencer. You are the pure witness, and the ego is merely a shadow. This teaching strikes at the heart of the spiritual path. Ashtavakra presents the ego as an illusion that can be transcended through self-inquiry. He emphasizes that the ego is not real. It is a phantom created by the mind. And once this is understood, the seeker can live in the natural state of freedom. The illusion of doership. In this section, Ashtavakra expands on the concept of doership, the belief that one is the doer of actions. He explains that this is another manifestation of the ego and is one of the primary causes of suffering. Ashtavakra. O Janak, understand that all actions take place in the world of form, but the self remains untouched by them. The body acts, the mind thinks, but you are neither the body nor the mind. You are the witness of all action. When you understand this, the false notion of doership will dissolve, and you will remain in peace, unaffected by the outcomes of actions. This concept aligns with the teachings of other non-dual traditions, such as the Bhagavad Gita, where the idea of action without attachment to the results is emphasized. By transcending the belief in doership, the seeker is freed from the cycle of karma and the anxiety that accompanies it. Chapter 7. The state of the realized being. In this chapter, Ashtavakra describes the characteristics of a person who has realized the self. Such a person, he explains, is free from desires, unaffected by the dualities of pleasure and pain, success and failure, and lives in a state of eternal peace. Janak, what is the state of a realized being, O sage? How does one who has attained knowledge live in the world? Ashtavakra. The realized being is like a child, innocent, free from attachments, and unburdened by the past or future. He moves through the world without desire, content in the present moment. He sees no distinction between pleasure and pain, for he knows that both are mere appearances in consciousness. Such a person lives in the world but is not of the world. His mind is like a clear sky, vast, empty, and undisturbed by passing clouds. This imagery of the realized being as a child is a powerful metaphor for the state of innocence and freedom that comes with enlightenment. The childlike state is one of openness, spontaneity, and trust, qualities that are often lost as we grow older and become more identified with the ego and its fears. Living beyond duality, Ashtavakra elaborates on the idea of living beyond duality. He explains that dualities such as good and bad, success and failure, and happiness and sorrow exist only in the mind. The realized being transcends these dualities and remains anchored in the non-dual awareness of the self. Ashtavakra, duality is the play of the mind. It creates distinctions where there are none. The self is beyond all dualities. It is neither good nor bad, neither happy nor sad. When you realize this, you will no longer be swayed by the changing conditions of the world. You will remain centered in the unchanging truth of the self. This teaching points to one of the key aspects of Advaita Vedanta, the recognition that the world of duality is a projection of the mind. The self, which is pure consciousness, is beyond all dualities and remains unaffected by them. Chapter 8. The illusion of time and space. As the dialogue deepens, Ashtavakra introduces the idea that time and space are also illusions created by the mind. He explains that the self is eternal, beyond time and space, and that these concepts arise only in the realm of the physical world. Janak, O sage, how can one transcend the limitations of time and space? Ashtakra, time and space exist only in the world of form. The self, however, is formless and beyond all limitations. Just as a dream seems to occur within a framework of time and space, but vanishes upon waking, so too does the world of time and space vanish when you awaken to the self. Realize that you are the timeless, spaceless consciousness, in which all things appear and disappear. This teaching challenges our most fundamental assumptions about reality. Ashtavakra asserts that time and space are constructs of the mind, and that in the ultimate reality of the self, they do not exist. This idea aligns with the teachings of many non-dual traditions, which emphasize that the self is beyond all categories of thought and experience. Chapter 9. The Role of Grace in Liberation. In this chapter, Ashtavakra speaks of the role of grace in the process of liberation. While self-effort is important, he explains, liberation ultimately comes through the grace of the divine or the guru. Janak, O sage, is liberation achieved through effort or is it granted by grace? Ashtavakra, effort is necessary to prepare the mind, but liberation is ultimately a gift of grace. The divine grace descends when the seeker has purified the mind and turned inward toward the self. Just as the sun cannot be forced to rise, but its light can be received when it appears, so too is liberation received when the mind is ready. It is the final effortless realization that you are already free. This teaching emphasizes the balance between self-effort and grace in the spiritual path. While the seeker must engage in practices such as meditation, self-inquiry, and detachment, the ultimate realization of the self comes as a spontaneous grace, a sudden awakening to the truth that has always been present. Chapter 10. The End of Seeking. As Janak reaches the end of his inquiry, Ashtavakra explains that the spiritual search itself must come to an end when the seeker realizes the truth of the self. The act of seeking implies that there is something to be attained, but in reality, the self is already present and complete. Ashtavakra. O Janak, the time has come to abandon all seeking. The self is not something that can be sought or found, for it is your very nature. The moment you stop seeking, the self reveals itself. It is like searching for a necklace that is already around your neck. When you give up the search, you will find that you have always been what you were seeking. This final teaching brings the dialogue to a profound conclusion. Ashtavakra invites Janak to let go of all striving, all seeking, and to rest in the knowledge that he is already free. The self is not something to be attained. It is the ever-present reality, and liberation is the simple recognition of this truth. The realization of King Janak after receiving these teachings, Janak is filled with a deep sense of peace and liberation. He no longer identifies with the body, mind, or ego, and he sees the world as a play of consciousness. The dialogue ends with Janak expressing his gratitude to Ashtavakra for guiding him to this realization. Janak, O sage, through your grace, I have realized the truth of the self. I am free from all attachments, desires, and fears. I see now that the world is an illusion, and that I am the eternal witness. I bow to you, O wise one, for revealing this ultimate truth to me. Ashtavakra responds with a final blessing, encouraging Janak to live in the world with the knowledge of the self and to share this wisdom with others. Ashtavakra. O king, may you continue to live in the world but not of the world. Remain rooted in the self and let your actions flow naturally, without attachment or desire. Share this wisdom with those who are ready to receive it. And may all beings find peace and liberation. The Ashtavakra Gita offers a direct and uncompromising path to liberation. Through the dialogue between King Janak and sage Ashtavakra, we are invited to recognize the illusion of the ego, the world, and all dualities. The teachings point to the ultimate truth that we are not the body, the mind, or the doer of actions, but the pure, formless consciousness that witnesses all experience.